Hello, I am Rose Roby. I am Matthew Ho's campaign manager in his campaign for U.S. Senate. And I am just here to introduce two very exciting guests. We're, of course, extremely excited and honored to welcome Richard D. Wolff. He is a professor of economics emeritus at University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he taught economics from 1973 to 2008. He is currently a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University, New York City. Richard also teaches classes regularly at the Brecht Forum in Manhattan. His most recent book is Capitalism Hits the Fan, the Global Economic Meltdown and What to Do About It. A full archive of Richard's work, including videos and podcasts, can be found on his website, rdwolff.com. And I certainly recommend people go to that. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, Matthew Ho. Matthew Ho is a candidate for the 2022 North Carolina Green Party nomination for U.S. Senate. In 2009, Matthew resigned in protest from his post in Afghanistan with the State Department over the American escalation of the war. In 2010, Matthew was named the Weidenauer Prize recipient for truth-telling. Matthew's writings have appeared in online and print periodicals such as the Huffington Post, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. He has been a guest on hundreds of news programs and radio and television networks, including CBS, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, NPR, the BBC, and PBS. And with these introductions, I am going to get out of the way while these two distinguished gentlemen just have a very interesting discussion. And again, thank you so much for being here. It was an honor to meet you.
Thanks, Rose. And yeah, Professor Wolff, thanks so much for joining me. I'm really excited about this conversation. The opportunity to have you come on here with me and discuss some aspects of socialism that I think people are struggling to understand. We have a lot of people who will be watching this who are familiar with socialism. And then we have a lot of people who are not so familiar with it. And, so if we could begin with, I was thinking of the other day, I'm sure you're familiar with the television show Shark Tank, right? Where you get these entrepreneurs who come on, they've built a better vacuum cleaner, or they've got cookies that have no calories, or whatever it is they're pitching, and they pitch it to these business people. And my thoughts were, because I think socialism is so misunderstood, or it's, you have people who think socialism and they think that, well, that means we're all going to have to live in massive concrete buildings, work in factories, waiting line for bread. In every room of your house, you've got a picture of the country's leader hanging up. And in others, I think other people have an idea too of that. Well, socialism as best expressed through, Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And so they understand with through programs and policies like Medicare for all. But I think a lot of people struggle to understand just the basic idea behind socialism. So if you were going to go on to a program that was like Shark Tank, but rather than pitching to a bunch of businessmen, you were in businessmen and businesswomen, you were pitching to a bunch of working families. And what would be like your 3, 4, 5 minute pitch for socialism? Why should working families consider socialism? Oh, you're still muted, Professor Wolff.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, sorry. The way I would begin to make a pitch is to say something I hope everybody can understand. In all human history, whatever the economic system that people were living in, and we've had a lot of different ones, village economies, tribal economies, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, all of them. in all of those, one thing is really interesting, that people, human beings, are creative. And pretty soon you had people arriving in every system who had the feeling, you know, we can do it better. Just like those entrepreneurs you just mentioned. The one of them who figured out how to make a cookie with fewer calories, or how to make a toothbrush that has a little radio in it so you can listen to your favorite program while you brush your teeth. They're people who think we can do better. And socialists are simply people who live in a capitalist system, but have come to the conclusion, using their brains, that we can do better. We can have an economic system better than the one we have, which is, by the way, how we got to the one we have, because the people who went before us also thought they could do better. So for me, the first answer to the question, what is socialism? It's the yearning people develop, some sooner, some later, no fault there. You find your way to a notion that I can either make a better cookie, or I can make a better school, or I can make a better economic system. We shouldn't be all agog about it. It isn't a new phenomena in human history. It's literally as old as we are as a species, number one. Number two, socialism takes seriously all of those wonderful objectives that many of us learned about in school, about, for example, the American Revolution or the French Revolution. Remember the slogans? We're all equal. We're all, God loves us all if you're religious. In France, the revolution, about the same time as the American one, had the slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity. Okay, that'll do. Maybe we add democracy.
Right.
And socialists say simply, we can do better than we have done in realizing those objectives. For me, and I count myself a socialist, that's what motivates me. And let me give you concrete examples. And Bernie, by the way, says this sort of thing a lot. If you mean equality, well, then you have to do something to make equality. We are a less equal society today in America. Economically, I'm talking about wealth and income. We're less equal than we were 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, we were less equal than we had been 40 years earlier. In other words, we're not going in the right direction. If you believe in equality, we're going in the wrong direction. A few weeks ago, we all sat around, or many of us did, watching on television as the richest man in the world spent hundreds of millions of dollars to go together with a few of his friends on a rocket ship ride for a few minutes. I think most of us can understand that there really would be a lot better ways to use the 500 million or whatever it is he spent than that. I'm not saying make him a poor person, and I don't mind mentioning his name because, he's in the news. His name is Elon Musk, and I don't want to take away anything from his achievements. But if you took away half of his wealth, he would still be the richest man on this planet, but you would have $100 billion in which you could transform the lives of hundreds of millions of people, take them out of poverty, take them out of illness, Americans as well as others. I find it very hard to justify that kind of inequality. And the irony is, if you sit down with Elon Musk and people like him in the privacy of a room and you have a glass of juice or a cup of coffee, half of them will agree with you too.
Right.
Warren Buffett is famous for saying, my secretary pays a higher rate of taxes on her income than I do. I'm a billionaire. She's a secretary. He gets it. This isn't rocket science. Socialism is a commitment to really try to realize the goals that human beings have figured out. Freedom, equality, that makes for a better society. if some of us are very rich and the others are very poor, it creates tension, conflict, bitterness, envy. And that's, not just bad for the poor, it's bad for the rich as well. They're never secure. They're never comfortable. They're looking over their shoulder, which I understand. The goals of socialists are really for everybody to have a better society and to overcome the kinds of horrific conflicts that shake the world today, including in our own, here in the United States, in our own society. And finally, and perhaps a little new for people, beyond the big picture that socialists want to make better, there's an immediate issue that I think is going to become the focus of socialism in this century, which means for the rest of our lives. And that is to change the workplace. Socialists have long talked about big things, rich and poor, or the bad quality of capitalism that every few years it plunges us into a recession or an inflation like we're going through now. But here's something that's kind of a new focus, if you like, of socialism. And that is to bring democracy to the workplace, to make your democracy real. We live in a strange society. We insist that our political leaders be elected on a periodic basis, so that if we don't like what they do, we have a chance to vote them out of office, bring somebody else in. I've always wondered, since I've been a high school kid, if democracy is good in politics, which I believe it is, well, then why isn't it good in economics? Right. Why don't we have a community, not just where we live and play and go to school, but a community where we work? It should be governed democratically too. Everybody has an interest in the workplace. The people who work the machines, the people who clean up, the janitor, the whoever, whatever your role is in the factory or the office or the store, you are a human being and you have to live with what goes on in that place. So the logic of democracy is, if you're affected by what goes on, you have the right to participate in making the decisions, like we have voting and all the rest. So I think socialists are going to get an enormously bigger hearing than many people expect, because this demand for a working place that is democratic, where we all have one person, one vote, deciding what to produce and how to produce, and recognizing that some people have more education and we want their opinion and all of that. Human beings aren't stupid. They'll work it out in a reasonable way. But to bring democracy to the workplace, I think, is a completion of the democratic idea, and that socialists are in a position to lead the process of getting there.
Right. And before I forget, I want to say that if people want to hear more about the big picture of this, your most recent podcast, as of the day we're taping, so the one from April 7th, you give a really excellent explanation of the big picture reasons for socialism and against capitalism. And I urge people to go and listen to that episode from April 7th. And one of the things that strikes me when I hear you talk about these things is you haven't once said like a percentage of this, you haven't said GDP that, you haven't, right? I mean, like what you're saying is we can do better. And in my own personal life, as I look back and how did I become a socialist and everything? And okay, well, I was on the left, and in 2004, like Al Sharpton was my guy in the Democratic primaries, and then I voted for Barack Obama, and I was heartbroken when the public option was dropped. But most of my stuff was focused on foreign policy and war and economics, is that some other people can deal with that. But I was living with a woman, we were had a partner and marvelous person and incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent. And she had some health issues. And this was 2010, she had a townhome that was underwater. And there was no way she was ever going to get capital to do what she wanted to do. She wanted to teach people how to cook. That was her passion. She'd be amazing at it. Instead, she was working for a big consulting firm because she needed the health insurance. She needed the guaranteed income to pay off her student debt. She needed that, right? The house was underwater and no one is going to help you out. We'll bail out the bankers, but the 8 million people who lost their homes, forget about them. Right. So I think that's when it really started clicking for me. We can do better. And you see the golden handcuffs, right? The golden handcuffs that tie people to their jobs. And the idea that this socialist type system would not shackle economic growth, but would cause it to explode, because people would now be able to do the things that they were passionate about, do the things they're meant to do, not work in some consulting firm on the 5th floor off the highway, but do what you're passionate about and live your life, because you're not, and so then people, as they understand it, I think they say, okay, we achieved that through Medicare for all. We achieved that through universal college or student debt cancellation. We achieved that through public banking, all the big picture, the macro stuff. But since I've got you here, what I would like you to do is, what does it mean from the ground up? Like, what does socialism mean from the ground up? If you're an individual, your family, if you're an individual workplace and you started to get into this, and this is primarily what I want to talk about, so what does it mean from the ground up? And just because I know you're going to go into it, the next question is going to be, so what then does democracy in the workplace actually mean? What does it mean for individuals?
Well, I think it means many things. Let me try to go through some of them to kind of drive it home.
I know I'm not giving you like a right, like
no,
yeah, a yes or no question.
Right. But before I do, I want to make sure people do not think that what we're talking about is some fantasy pie in the sky, maybe in the distant future, somehow we can do it. I want people to understand that in many parts of the world, including here in the United States, people have already been doing this, and they've been doing it for a long time. So we're not starting from scratch. We're talking about an alternative way to organize the workplace that other people have found and enjoyed and kept going and grown. So, I mean, if we want later, I can go into some, examples here, both in the United States and in other countries, of where this is already a reality. But the basic idea is to say that the workplace should be where you not only do a particular task within a division of labor, you do this part of the work and your fellow worker does the other part of the work, but that you are part of a community that together produces whatever the output is of this enterprise. And that part of being in a community is having a say about what goes on. So what it would mean in the most intimate way for each individual is that your job is going to be split. You're going to have 2 job descriptions, whereas before you had 1. Normally, most of us as employees come to work, we cross the threshold into the job, and then we're told, sit over there, work with this machine, do this kind of work, and at the end of the day, at 5 o'clock, go home, and we don't want to see you until tomorrow morning, where you do it all again. That's over. In the image I have, in the notion I have, we need you to do your particular task, but you're also part of the group, of the community that designs the enterprise and builds the enterprise and makes the big decisions. What are we going to produce? How are we going to do it? How are we going to relate to one another in the process of doing it? And when we're done, how are we going to use the revenue that all of us together have helped to generate? It means you're going to have, what shall I call them, directorial obligations and responsibilities. We don't just want your technical expertise. We want you to develop your skills in thinking about an enterprise as a whole. We want you to be a full human being, not a drone who comes to work to do a narrow assignment. You're not a narrow person. Nobody is. We all have, like your partner there, we either love music, or we love cooking, or we love children. Or, in other words, we have diverse capabilities. Enterprise where we work ought to be a place where we develop them. And let me put it another way. In economics, we have a very bad habit. We teach something like a lot of people believe, that when you go to work, you do something unpleasant, unwanted. Why? To get the money so that when the job is over, you can go to the mall, right? In other words, consumption is the compensation for the drag that your job is. I never accepted that. And I think socialism is the refusal to accept that. Human beings, particularly us in America, we spend 5 out of 7 days, in most cases, at the job. When we're at the job in the best hours of the day, those 8 hours that we're there, we spend an hour getting ready to go there and brushing our teeth and all the rest. And then we come back. I mean, this is a big, huge part of our lives. It shouldn't be a negative whose only justification is consumption that comes later. Why not make it a beautiful, meaningful, enjoyable experience that develops you as a person, that looks to provide for you good relationships with the other people on the job, relationships that you look forward to? Why always the thought of the negativity? I think it reflects that we are not in charge of our jobs, that we have the sense it's always somebody else making the big decisions, and we just live with whatever the dictate is that comes down. I think socialists who could appeal and begin to develop the image of a differently organized workplace, which, by the way, in this country is called worker cooperative. If you think like that, you begin to see, why don't we do that? Why don't we have, for example, a democratic decision that could be put to the American people? Hey, worker co-op is one way of organizing business. Top-down hierarchical capital, that's another way. Let's have a debate, and then let's have a vote. What kind of country do we want? 50-50? 75-25? I mean, but in order to have that debate and to have that democratic decision, we've got to create a worker co-op sector in this society so people can see how it works. They can see whether they would like to work in that environment rather than in their cubicle in some big corporation. I'm not worried. I think if Americans got the feel for the alternative, I'm very confident a very large portion of us would be very much in the view, let's have worker co-ops, let's have that as an option. You know, one last way of putting it, Americans like to tell themselves that they are believers in the freedom of choice. Let's agree to that. And let's say that one of the choices Americans ought to have is the choice whether to work in a top-down hierarchical enterprise or in a democratically organized. Have the choice of buying the products produced in a worker co-op environment versus buying products produced in the... Let's give Americans that choice. They don't have that choice now, but we could create a sector of worker co-ops, and that would teach the American people what that is, and then they could decide, I like it, I don't like it. That would be fun. That would make a democratic decision. I believe in that. As a socialist, I would support that. But I don't think we're doing the American people justice by denying, which is what we do, that they have that choice, by excluding, you know, a young man or a young woman coming out of high school or college. They don't have a choice to go work in a worker co-op. There's so few in this country. It's a little different in Europe, for example, but in this country, they don't have a practically real choice. And as a socialist, I would advocate, let's give them that choice. Let's give the American people a bigger choice of how to spend their working lives, which is where most of us spend most of our adult life, at the workplace. Let's make that a better experience. I think an awful lot of people would find that a very worthwhile idea to consider.
And I know we're getting tight on time here, but if you have time for one more question.
Please, yes.
Okay, yeah. So, you know, how would this then, you know, workplace democracy, what would that have meant for COVID? what would that have meant for inflation? If inflation is driven by supply chain issues and investment in infrastructure and investing in productivity, and not how would workplace democracy affected that? How would COVID have been different for us as a people if workers were, as you said, in control of their labor, not just their labor, but also to the industry?
Absolutely. Perfectly good question. That's what a discussion and an open debate about the pros and cons of socialism and that's what we ought to have in this country. It's what we should have had the last 75 years, but we were afraid. We were in the Cold War. And there's a lot of people who can't abide having an open conversation. Look, it used to be you could never discuss, I don't know, religion or sex or all the other things that frighten people. And socialism was one of those taboo topics. It's sad. It's nothing I'm proud of as an American. I was born in Youngstown, Ohio. I've lived all my life in the United States. I'm proud of what this country has achieved, but I'm also embarrassed by the way it's in a backward position. And one of those backward positions is having lost the last 75 years of what we could have learned and gained had we talked about these topics, like the other taboo topics. Anyway, having said that, let me take the example of inflation since you asked it. And here, let me be an economist. I'm a professor of economics, so I'm going to explain something about inflation. Inflation means a general increase in prices. That's all it's ever meant. That's what we have now. Latest statistics, 8.5% rate of inflation over the last 12 months in the United States economy. That is a terrible problem, particularly for middle income and low income people, because they're the ones who don't have the money to pay the higher prices. The richer you are, the less burdened you are by rising prices. I mean, there's no way to escape from this. This is an unfair economic phenomena, the inflation. Okay, who determines prices in our society? Answer, the employer. The employer is in a position in every store, in every factory, in every office to set prices. Employees, the vast majority of us, do not have a role in setting prices. Before the price is changed in any enterprise, the boss doesn't call in all the workers and say, gee, what do you think? Should I raise them? Doesn't happen. Okay, if employers are the people who set the prices, let me remind everyone, employers are less than 1% of the American people. So 99% of us have to pay the prices that 1% of us establish. And so if you have an inflation, the first reality you have to face is that the inflation exists because the employers of America have raised their prices. Now, the second question, why did they do it? Well, here we get a really interesting, kind of schizophrenic answer. The answer that you ought to give to why you raise a price if you're an employer is what you learn in business school. Every business school, and I've taught in them, every business school teaches the young men and women who go through the program that the name of the game in business is to make a profit. Your career will do well if you make rising profits, and it won't go well for you if you don't. Every decision you make has to be examined in terms of its impact on the bottom line, which is another word for profit. Okay, so the honest answer of any businessman or woman as to why they raise a price is because it's the profitable thing to do. But of course, that's not what they can say in public. Why? Because the rest of us who have to pay the higher prices would be, I'll be polite now, disturbed or stressed or out of sorts, or, you get the picture.
Yeah.
And so they have to come up with, if you pardon me, a lot of BS about all the things that are happening, all of which happen to not be their fault, which require that. I mean, if you take that seriously, I would like to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, you're being gullible. all these stories about supply chain disruption, it's wonderful. Supply chain disruptions happen all the time. And by the way, even if they happen a bit more these days, because we live in a crazy world, that still leaves open the question, what are you doing in your business? For example, if you can't get one commodity as you used to, go get another one.
Right.
Hey, why aren't you busy solving the problem? You're deciding to raise the price. I suspect there may be a little something in there for you too. So my answer is, in a socialist system, the whole community of people at the workplace would make the decision. And that community is mostly people who now have to pay the higher price. They're going to have a completely different attitude towards this whole question of setting prices. They're going to understand if we do it, then whoever we sell to is going to be stimulated to do likewise. We got to handle this differently. And what would that mean? Well, let me surprise you by taking a page from a Republican conservative President of the United States, Richard Nixon, who in August of 1971, in the face of a terrible inflation, which we had at that time, went on radio and television and said, because this inflation is terrible and because it impacts large numbers of people in a very unjust way, making their lives very hard, I'm declaring, these are his words, a wage price freeze as of tomorrow morning. And that means, and he was real clear, that means, Mr. or Mrs. businessman or woman, if you raise your price tomorrow or the next day or next week, we're going to arrest you and put you in jail because you will have violated the law. And guess what? Overnight, the inflation stopped. By the way, were there problems with such an arrangement? Yes. There are problems with everything you can do with an inflation, including not trying to stop it. So don't tell me that there were problems. There were. But problems exist with every policy you have a choice among. You've got to decide. And I think a democratic decision of people in enterprises would handle all of these questions in a very different way. Ironically, they'd be more inclined to do a wage price freeze, as was done by a Republican conservative, right, than they would be by what you're watching with Mr. Biden in the White House.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that explanation. It dispels a lot, and it makes people kind of think of this, because it goes back to what you're originally saying, at the beginning of this question, about 75 years of unable to have a conversation, unable to get information. Like, right. I'm going to try and share my screen here. Please bear with me. It's been 2 years with Zoom and I'm still not, but I came upon, I don't know if you could see this here. I came upon this yesterday. I was born in 73 and this was the type of stuff that was still going around, as well as, there's another one I came across too. Where's the other one? Oops, that's not it. Hang on. Let's see if I can do it right this time. Nope. For whatever reason, it's not letting me share the other one, but you get the idea. The other one was even more violent. It wasn't Uncle Sam just drifting towards the red iceberg. This was communism will kill us. And it was flames and people with Stalin-esque type hats on, strangling all the good people of America. And, that's what I grew up with. And so, the difference now in the conversations we've had about this, the ability to have the conversation about this, and what you said too earlier about the Warren Buffetts, the Elon Musks, if you were to sit down with these people and they would agree to a lot, if not most, of what we are saying. And I think we see that in public polling all the time. But, for people who want to learn more about this, could you please let them know how they can follow you, your books, your podcast, those kinds of things? And then any closing remarks you have, Professor Wolff.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of closings before I give you the websites and so forth to go to. Here's another way to make your point. Millions of Americans for many years save up enough money and make a trip to Europe, since so many of us descend from immigrants who came here, and they go to countries, I don't know, France or Portugal or Italy or Spain or wherever, you know, your folks came from, Germany. And so I like to tell people, you know, you go to those countries, you enjoy their monuments, you enjoy their history, you dabble and taste their food and their cuisine and all of the rest of it. But what you probably don't know, because you live in a little bit of a bubble, is that socialism is a part of the daily life in these societies. So let me give you a few examples. In 2016, there was an election in, I'm going to pick one, Portugal. Okay. The way Portugal works is they have multiple political parties. Already here's a problem for America. We like freedom of choice, but we don't have more than 2 political parties most of the time, because we don't allow other political parties to function and to grow the way they do in Europe. Why? Because Europe has something called proportional representation. If you're a political party in most European countries, and let's say you get 20% of the vote, you get 20% of the seats in their parliament, because those 20% who voted that way should have their representatives in there writing the laws and participating in government. How could you justify democratically excluding them? So in this election in 2016 in Portugal, no party got more than 50% of the vote. And when that happens in proportional representation, you have to have what's called a coalition government. You have to get the parties together, so together their vote is more than 50%. So the way the coalitions were formed in Portugal in 2016, let me describe the government that's been there for the last 6 years now. Mm-hmm. The number 1 political party is the Portuguese Socialist Party. The number 2 party in the coalition is the Portuguese Communist Party. And the number 3 party in the governing coalition is the Portuguese Green Party. Right. That's the government of Portugal. Every American, and there have been hundreds of thousands, that has enjoyed the spectacular beaches and the history and the cuisine of Portugal ever since, we're going to a country governed by Greens, Communists, and Socialists. And in 2020, they stood for election again. They had their next election, and they got an even bigger majority, those 3, and they continue to be the government. You could count the tiny number of Americans who have any idea about what I said just now. Or let me take it more urgently. This last Sunday, there was an election in France, okay? They had a dozen parties running, just to give you an idea. The top 3 parties were the party of the president, Mr. Macron, mm-hmm. the party of a right-wing challenger, a woman named Marine Le Pen, mm-hmm. and the third major contestant was a socialist. Okay, the newspapers in America for the last several days have been full of the president, Macron, and the challenger, Le Pen. Yeah. Well, let me now tell you what the reality is. Mr. Macron got 27% of the vote. That means 73% of the French people who went to the polls don't want him as president. This is after 4 years of watching this man function. I mean, that is catastrophic for him, and it should be the headline, number 1. Number 2, the right-wing Le Pen woman, she got 23.1% of the vote. But the third candidate, a man named Mélenchon, who is a socialist, he got, ready, 22% of the vote. Right. So he has as much support in France as does Le Pen, but I would conservatively estimate that 99% of Americans think that French politics is all about the right of center Macron and the even more right-wing Le Pen. Yeah. That is a misunderstanding that really denies the American people what we ought to have, which is a discussion that I could summarize as follows. If the Mélenchon socialists had gotten together with the French Communist Party, which got 2.5% of the vote, if you put Mélenchon's 22 together with the communists 2.5, that would make 24.5. They would be the challenger of Mr. Macron, not the right-wing woman Le Pen. I mean, you misunderstand. And that would, if you did understand it, you would ask the question. Americans are smart. Why are so many French people interested in socialism and communism? What's going on there? Why, for example, in this election they just had, was the issue of Ukraine a minor matter that most people didn't get interested in? They had other things that were much more important. What's going? They're closer to the Ukraine than we are. You know, what's going on? So for me, I think it's a real loss to us that we continue, even though it's much better now than it's been before, we continue to have a hard time talking about socialism. Look, it is a little bit, if you allow me, like sex. You know, sex is a very important part of our lives. And if we don't talk about it, that doesn't mean it isn't there. And it doesn't mean it doesn't count.
We're all here because of sex, right?
Exactly, right. And it's an important part of life. And we kind of know it, but we have these taboos so that our children don't learn in an appropriate way about it, and therefore make mistakes that are sometimes, you know, big ones, etc. So anyway, having said all that, we maintain a website, 2 of them, where everything you might ever want to know about socialism and these kinds of issues, worker co-ops and so on, we flood that. I mean, I do a regular weekly radio and television show. We produce podcasts and video. It's an enormous, and it's all there and it's all free. And so I'm going to give you the names of them, but yes, we invite anyone, make use of them in any way that you want. The first one you announced a little bit earlier is simply my name, R as in Richard, D, my middle initial, Wolff, W-O-L-F-F, 2 Fs, rdwolff.com. You get a whole bunch of stuff. Our organization is called Democracy at Work. You can see the whole idea. So socialism means for us democracy at work. And so you go to democracyatwork.info, and that'll give you, as I say, more material. None of it costs a nickel than you can possibly go through in your lifetime, but it's there so that people can begin to have the conversations we should have been having, and that I really want to commend you for initiating, because that's a service you're doing up and beyond everything else, just to have these conversations, to make them more part of our normal political life is an important contribution.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that, Professor Wolff. And just to, I listen to, I encourage people to do it as well. I listen to Economic Update, the show you put out every week. Right. I learn something every time. You have great guests. It causes me to, you have a lot of guests that are you're not going to really hear anywhere else. And you bring on people that sometimes you think, what does this person have to do with economics? And then, you listen to it and you're like, oh, that completely makes sense now. But also too, some of the books you put out, I just read a couple months ago, Stuck Nation, which I recommend to people, so yeah, no, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, explain these things. I have people in my family who need to watch stuff like this, because as you kind of said before, they already agree with it. They're just kind of scared away by the title,
the language,
right? Which goes to, we could do a whole thing on the power of narrative, right? That's what we're talking about. But again, I really appreciate you taking the time here, and thank you for the work you do. And and thanks everyone for watching this, joining us, and please all be well, and please share this with your friends and family who are similar to mine, who agree with these things, but when you say the S word, oh man,
scared.
The boogeyman is coming out of the closet or from under the bed or whatever. So okay, well, thank you everyone, and thank you again, Professor Wolff.
Thank you.